Hello and welcome to today's Q&A live stream first impressions sort of session with the new focal Elear. And if you are joining us live, then feel free to add comments in the chat and I'll read them and I'll be replying to them throughout the stream. So first things first, I want to give a big thank you to Nick from Brisbane, who has actually loaned me his pair of Elears, and he just got it from his audio store. So I know how hard it is to take yourself away from a really shiny new toy. So big props to him for loaning this to me for 2 weeks. So what I was gonna do, I actually just picked these up last night, and I thought that I would give you my very kind of raw first impressions of these. Answer any kind of outstanding questions you might have right at the beginning, and then I'm going to give these a longer listen and then get back to you on sort of my semi-conclusion after 2 weeks of listening. Usually I like to review things after 1 month of kind of listening time and living with something, but there's a few things that I can say about this even in the first few hours of kind of listening. I've been using my Matrix M stage, but I found that this actually, it picks up, after that last video about my setup, I still found the Elear actually still picks up a hum from this, so I don't know what's going on here. I also get pretty decent output out of the new audio interface I bought, Focusrite 2 Pre Claret. So let's start by talking about the build of this headphone and my immediate impressions of the build quality. I was gonna say that from the press shots, I was always a bit worried about how the Elear looked, because I thought in the kind of press pictures it looked like a bit like a weird mesh egg with a hole in it. And now that I have the headphone in the hand, it looks like a weird mesh egg with a hole in it. I mean, this is purely superficial. I'm not the biggest fan of this industrial design. I much prefer the Utopia, which I finally had a chance to sort of demo the other day. I like the way that the lines kind of break up on the grill. This kind of, I don't know, it looks a bit oddly ovoid to me. That's just really a superficial consideration. In terms of actual design, and you'll notice that it has this little mod mic attachment. This is Nick's, because he's going to use this at a desktop. Very, very luxury headset experience. I had to say, this is a $1,600 headphone, so that's probably one thing to note. Build is really nice in terms of the metal surfaces. Everything looks really good. One thing I noticed on Nick's unit, and I confirmed this with him, it squeaks a little when you pivot the right ear cup. If you hear that, that's a bit of a letdown, I had to say, because of the relatively new age of this unit. For it to squeak like that, it's not the best thing in the world. But apart from that, I think it's relatively well built. The one objection I really have to the way this headphone is built is that this cable is ridiculous. This cable is ludicrously heavyweight, and this is already a heavy headphone. So when you put the headphone on your head, you feel the Elear is really being dragged down by this heavyweight cable, and I understand there's probably some sort of fancy audiophile reason for the cable to be this thick. I don't care. Like, this is a really heavy cable, and it's even more kind of unwieldy as a result than the Stax cable. Now, I thought that the cable on my Stax L300, this was sort of hard to deal with because I've had to pull this in my lap whenever I wear the headphone. But this is actually a lighter cable than the Elear cable. The Elear cable is like this 4-meter cable, and the only thing I can really do to make it sort of comfortable is sort of hang it around the back of my neck like a dead animal. So not a big fan of this cable. Luckily, it is a detachable cable, so there's that. I imagine that there's going to be all these nice braided options and everything that will be hopefully lighter in weight. I'd probably look into that, but yeah, that's one of my big objections, because it makes the headphone, which is otherwise a relatively comfortable headphone, in terms of the way the ear pads fit, and the clamping force and the distribution across the headband, it's all really nice, except that this cable really kind of weighs it down because, it is a heavy headphone. It's over 400 grams. And unlike the stacks where it sort of conforms that, like, it has a kind of a center of gravity that's closer to your actual head because it's closer to the side, this sticks out a little more. So if you tilt your head with this headphone on, you can actually feel it really sort of pulling on one side or the other along with that cable. So I have reservations about this comfort. Like, straight off the bat, it's not a terribly uncomfortable headphone, but it's one of those things where I'm sure that the first hour is comfortable and then it starts to get a little frustrating after that. I'm not going to say that the Elear I'm not going to say, sorry, that the Stax is a really super comfortable headphone either. Most notably because the L300, the ear pads are so shallow. And more importantly, this Stax is built like crap. Like, it looks terrible in build compared to the Elear. Though I do prefer the design. That's just me. I like that kind of brutal aesthetic. But as I said, because it fits flatter against the side of the head, so you don't feel it pulling on your head when you tilt your head as much. The reason why I keep comparing it to the Stax, by the way, is that pretty much these are the only two headphones that I have over $1,000. So feels like the most natural comparison I have on hand. I'm going to dip into the live chat for a moment. LHL says, by the way, that cable looks insane. Are there shorter or lighter replacement cables available for the Elear right now? I don't know. I'm assuming that there are because this connector seems very, very simple. It's like a 3.5 millimeter mono connector. You can see that. It's nothing fancy going on here. Probably very easy to manufacture your own. No locking mechanism, nothing like that. It's just pretty much two 3.5 millimeter mono connectors. So it's got that going for it. Let's talk about the sound. So this is I think about a $1,599 in Australia. So there's no question that this is I'd say right off the bat, this is a good headphone. I'm not going to argue that it's not a good headphone. I like it. Like, I think it sounds really good. Now, exclusive of the price, if I wasn't thinking about the price, I would say this is a good sounding headphone. It's a little warmer than I expected right off the bat. After demoing the Utopia, and I really like the Utopia. Again, that's like a $5,000, $6,000 headphone. So if it's not good, then there's a real problem. But I liked the Utopia. I really liked the sort of treble presence and the sort of really natural kind of sound staging. The Focal is actually a little more rolled off in the highs than I expected, even compared to the Utopia. And when I think about the way it compares to, say, the Sennheiser HD 800, but that's not necessarily a bad thing to be rolled off in the highs. It's not steeply rolled off. We're not talking like a Shure SRH 1540 or like a Bose or something like that where it just kind of slopes down. But it has some things going on there with the treble and the mids. There's a few dips maybe in the upper mids or the lower treble where the sound is just a little blunted. And because it's a little blunted, it doesn't have that kind of hard edge to some of the notes, like particularly triangles. Imagine like a triangle ting or like cymbal kind of thing, cymbals or even vocals. Again, they're not stuffy. It's not super congested, but there's just that little bit of bluntness to the sound that I'm not a huge fan of on this Elear, just based on my first impressions. And the interesting thing is, when you compare it to the Stax, right? The Stax is a thinner sound overall. It's a thinner, leaner sounding headphone, so more emphasis in the mids and the treble, and there's less emphasis on the bass. But I think the Stax, it actually sounds smoother in the highs, in that I feel like there's a little more evenness in tone in the highs, so that I don't get that sort of blunt feeling to the mids. And also, I feel like the bass, there's less of it, but I feel like it's a little bit punchier than it is on the Elear. And I'm really sort of getting down in the weeds here. This is really sort of nitpicking, because at this point, being impressed by a $15 headphone, $1,500 headphone rather, that's par for the course. Like, I should be impressed, but when it's $1,500, I really want to get in there and sort of nitpick. So let's jump back to the live chat. Visionary Blender says, okay, let's hit a question to Mr. Sang, by all means. Since the treble is a little rolled off on this, how do you think this fares on hot, upbeat electronic music? See also Machine Girl, Come to Brute, Elite Gymnastics. So Visionary is just sort of name dropping some of his favorite artists there. I will say that's what I was going to say, actually. This is a good headphone, I think, particularly as an all-rounder, because it's not, I would say, particularly harsh in the highs. It has that sort of warm sound to it. And the thing I forgot to mention until now is that I really love the kind of imaging and the sense of layering on this headphone, because the way they designed this ear cup, it feels very open, and it has a really natural feeling soundstage. I don't know how else to put it, and I really hate talking about soundstage, because honestly, it's such a vague term that's dependent on so many different things. But the only way I can say it is that it sounds natural, in a way that perhaps, like, say, the Sony MA900 with the really angled ear cups and the really kind of large volume on the inside of the ear cup, it sounds really open and nice in that regard. So I think it would sound kind of nice with electronic, kind of hotly mastered albums, provided that you do want a bit more bass. I think that the amount of bass for me is, I like the amount of bass here. I like the overall sound of this more than the Sennheiser HD800, for instance, because I think it has much more of a rich sound to it. But at the same time, because of that slight unevenness in the mids, I don't quite like it, particularly for some vocalists, like the way that I like the stacks and a lot of other Japanese or Asian tuned headphones. And I think that they make a comparison where they say European headphones and Asian headphones are sort of different in that there's more of an emphasis, there's more of a mid coloration, particularly from brands like Audio-Technica, with stacks or even Sony. There's that coloration in the mids that is maybe distinctive to Japanese or Asian headphones, and maybe because they listen to more female vocalists, maybe they listen to more classical music in particular. In particular, Japan listens to, I believe, more classical music than the rest of the world put together. They have a coloration. They tend to have a coloration in the treble that I prefer, and the Elear is more. Again, I don't want to give you the impression that it's rolled off, like, overall in terms of treble, because I don't think that that's really accurate. But it doesn't have a sort of lift. The Black Hawks are coming for me. It doesn't have a sort of lift in the vocals that I would necessarily like. But again, I prefer this over, say, the Sennheiser HD800. Now, if we talk about the question of price, again, now this always, it sounds crazy to say it, and it sounds crazy to me when I say it, but I honestly think that the Stax L300, for the price of this headphone and the amp, for the starter headphone kit, if you're getting it in the States, it's cheaper than the Elear and the HD800. The full system cost, including an amplifier, is less. I bought the L300 with the fancier amp, and even then, the whole system package is less than a Focal Elear, and I think that they are comparable. I mean, you may want more bass than what the Stax can give you, for sure. I can understand that, but I think that they are I think they're on a comparable tier. Not the horrible build quality of the stacks notwithstanding. If it was me, I wouldn't necessarily, 15.99. It's really hard to say. They always say don't shop with your own wallet when you're necessarily recommending things for other people. This isn't when I'm going to spend over $1,000. I want something that I'm going to really fall in love with. I like the way this sounds, and maybe my impressions of it will change over 2 weeks, but I don't have this kind of immediate falling in love moment with this headphone. So I'm gonna sort of throw it open to the chat now, because I've just basically gone through everything that I had from my initial notes. And over the next 2 weeks, I will see if I can get an opportunity to really compare this more against the Utopia, which again I sort of preferred, because the Utopia had almost like that kind of thin treble, without being horrible, but almost more like a Beyerdynamic sort of headphone. And I would say of all the brands, all the European brands, I know Beyerdynamic gets a lot of crap for their treble, and a lot of their headphones I think are just on that borderline of being unlistenable. But a lot of my favorite headphones are also Beyers. So I guess I do. Over time, it's funny. As I've tried more kind of headphones, I realize I like treble, and I like to push the treble right up to the limit to where I find it uncomfortable. But right before then, I really like it right before then, I had to say. So, yeah, I don't know how this happened during the course of this thing. I'm dreadfully afraid of damaging this headphone, because Nick is so kindly. By the way, if you feel like, because Nick was saying, Nick, the gentleman who lent me this headphone, he was saying, I've watched your channel for a long time. I want to find a way to help out, and I know we've got the Patreon. I know that doesn't work for everyone. This was a really wonderful thing to do, especially considering the newness of this headphone. And if you would like to sort of send something my way, I know I'm in Australia, so it's a little bit harder, but if you are keen on that, just chuck me an email anytime. LachlanLikesAthing@gmail.com, and I'm very happy to talk about that with you. I actually lent my Beyer DT770 to Nick, so we're doing a little bit of a swap, which is fun. Obviously, not in the same league of headphones, though the DT770 has always been sort of a pet, kind of a lot of pet affection for that headphone. So, LHL says, since you have the R70X, it would be interesting to hear more of a direct comparison versus that in terms of comfort and sound. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, the R70X I think is a more comfortable headphone than the Elear, because the Elear is very heavy. I know that a lot of people don't find the R70X comfortable because the ear cup is relatively small and your ears might touch the back of the driver. I don't have that problem with the R70X, so because the R70X is much lighter weight than the Elear, like it more, way more in terms of comfort. I like most headphones that I own more in terms of comfort than the Elear, because I tend to have selectively pared down my collection to things that I regard as comfortable. In terms of sound, look, I think you could actually go from the R70X to the Elear. Like, I think that would be a sort of natural progression, in the same way that a Sennheiser HD650 to an Elear, I think would be, don't know why the helicopters are out in force today, but I think those kind of warmer sounding headphones, logical sort of progression to the Elear. The R70X has, just really specifically, when I've done the kind of quick A/B and again first impressions, I feel like the R70X has a little more of that thinness, that lift to the vocals, less bass, and also the R70X doesn't have the same, I would say, detail or clarity of imaging that the Elear has. Because there's a real sense of openness here with the Elears. It's a really, despite the relative, I guess, recession of some of the high frequency range, it has this really open sound to my ears that I think is the best aspect of this headphone. So, I'm going to end with a line from Visionary Blender. I think we should totally hear a Porta Pro comparison because everyone knows that the Porta Pro is the best open back and at the end of the point of diminishing returns. Yes, it always comes back to the question of value. When you look at these kind of $1,500 headphones, you have this sort of uneasy situation because for me, coming into this sort of hobby, I'm not at the point where $15. I bought this, right? But if it wasn't for the YouTube channel and if it wasn't for the Patreon contributions, I wouldn't be at the point where I would be even looking at these sort of headphones. So it's very funny that this is kind of happening and that I have people sort of lending me such nice headphones, or I have a chance to go demo those things because I otherwise wouldn't give these the time of day. I would think to myself, well, it's better not to know what these sound like. When I hear a lot of $1,500, over kilobuck headphones, so I'm not necessarily. Most of them I think are well built, and I think it is basically a sort of real bad point if the headphone isn't well built over $1,000. I mean, that just starting with that, but it really is when you get up to $1,000, you're at the point of diminishing returns where you aren't simply going to be able to say this X is better than Y. It's really not the case. It's not even the case at the lower end of the market, but at the lower end of the market, that there's some compromises that they make that are very obvious. Over $1,000, it's really a matter of preference. It's really a matter of nitpicking. So I really feel like these kind of headphones are either for people who are prepared to buy blind, essentially, and are going to be happy with this headphone without having demoed it. I'd never spend over $1,000 on a headphone without demoing it first. So if you're buying blind, I think you should only buy blind if you're a collector. So you got a bunch of kilobuck headphones and you're interested to see how this compared. So you just want to do that. But otherwise, $1,000, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you this is the most amazing thing ever, because it's really, really going to be up to you in terms of your personal preference. I'm not going to say there's a bad headphone. I'm not right now, first impressions, loving that sort of mid-response, but I look forward to listening to this more over the next 2 weeks. Anyway, if you have any other kind of questions or comments, leave them in the chat, and I will kind of look at them, go through them in this kind of accelerated 2-week range. Don't know if I'm going to be able to do a sort of really, really kind of in-depth review of these, but I'll do my best to do kind of comparisons. Go and watch my Shin Godzilla review because that's a review that I'm really happy with the way that video turned out, and I know that not all of my subscribers watched it. It's not for everyone, I grant you that, but I think it is one of the more interesting videos on the channel. So go check that out. I will see you guys later. Bye.